Few people talk regarding Scorpio and religion. People see the exit, the empty chair, the gradual distancing, the growing silence where devotion once resided, and draw the easiest conclusion, that he has lost his faith, that the world has corrupted him, that he has turned away from God. But those who truly know Scorpio know that this sign doesn't abandon anything without first suffering greatly, and that when he leaves, it's because he stayed too long in a place that could no longer sustain him. Scorpio's departure isn't impulsive, it's the slow conclusion of an equation he's been silently trying to solve for months, sometimes years. I need you to stop for a second and think about something. Think about the moment you stopped going. Not the decision, the moment before the decision. That Sunday when you sat on the bench and looked around and felt an emptiness that wasn't the absence of God. It was something different, heavier, as if you were in a place that was once sacred to you, and now it was just a place, full of people, full of words, and completely empty of what you went there to look for. You tried to reconnect, you tried to sing like before, you tried to pray like before, and you realized that the movement was the same, but the feeling never returned. Scorpio doesn't withdraw out of rebellion. That's the biggest misunderstanding about this sign and spirituality. Scorpio withdraws because the intensity with which they feel the sacred doesn't fit into the forms that have been created to contain this experience. They don't want less of God. They want more depth, more truth, more space for doubt, for pain, for the questions that religion sometimes answers too quickly. There is a type of faith that most people will never need because it is too expensive to bear, a faith that doesn't accept ready-made answers. That goes to the depths of one's own wound in search of something real. That prefers the silence of God to the empty smile of someone who claims to have all the answers. That is the faith of Scorpio. It is beautiful. It is exhausting. And it almost always ends at a point where the institution and the individual reach a crossroads, and one of them needs to give in. Scorpio doesn't give in. Not at times like these. Never at times like these. And that's not stubbornness, it's the only form of honesty they know, because giving in would mean pretending, and Scorpio can do many things, but pretending about what they truly feel isn't one of them. But the problem isn't the way out, the problem is what comes before it. There's a pattern among the signs that manage to process this kind of thing externally by talking, very specific in how Scorpio absorbs religious guilt. Unlike others crying, confessing, Scorpio takes it inside. He chews on the guilt slowly, silently, alone, and it accumulates. And he becomes quieter, and the people around him interpret this silence as devotion, as spiritual maturity, as inner peace. When in reality, it's a sign that he's swallowing a whole stone. The spiritual body of Scorpio doesn't reject immediately. It endures, it withstands, it stays, it tries again, it changes congregations, it seeks a different pastor, different music, a different prayer group. It still believes the solution might lie within the structure until one day it realizes it has been trying for too long, and that what it feels is no longer faith fighting against doubt. It's exhaustion, a silent exhaustion that no one around can see. And then that question arises that no one asks aloud inside a temple. Could it be that the problem isn't my faith, but where I've placed it? It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose. It's not a book that will tell you everything will be all right if you have enough faith. It's a book written for those who feel too much, question too much, and can't be content with a superficial spirituality. For those who left a religious structure carrying more questions than answers, and still don't know what to do with that weight. For those who want to understand why their faith has always been more intense, deeper, more demanding than that of the people around them, and why that has never been a flaw. It offers real guidance. It's the language to name what you feel when the sacred is within you, but the way you used to express it no longer serves you. For Scorpio, this is almost a necessity for spiritual survival, because without this inner map, the break with religion can turn into a void that lasts for years. A void that seems like freedom at first, but that weighs heavily over time in ways that are difficult to name. You are now at a point of recognition. Perhaps you have already experienced exactly this. Perhaps you are still experiencing it. The discomfort that has arisen here is no coincidence. It is a sign that something within you is ready to go deeper than it has before. And the best time to act is when that openness is still alive. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, do you still consider yourself a spiritual person even after distancing yourself from religion? I want to hear from you, because what comes after leaving is one of the loneliest experiences a Scorpio can have, and they rarely talk about it. There's a side to this story that almost no one tells, the side where Scorpio, even after leaving, doesn't let go of the sacred. He takes it with him, hidden inside his chest like an ember that won't go out. He continues talking to God, just not aloud, just not on a wooden bench, just not with the words he learned. He speaks in other ways, in the silence of the early morning, in the pain he can't name, in the gratitude he sometimes feels without quite knowing why, in the anger he directs at God as if he were fighting with someone he still believes exists, because you don't fight like that with someone you've already given up on. This is one of the most paradoxical things about Scorpio. He can be furious with a religious institution and still maintain an intimate, confrontational, and completely real relationship with the divine, because for him, God was never the institution, never the sermon, never the collective approval on Sunday. It was something he felt directly, without intermediaries. And when the intermediaries began to outweigh the direct experience, he simply removed the intermediaries. But removing intermediaries comes at a cost that takes time to appear. Scorpio's spiritual loneliness after a religious break isn't an absence of faith. It's an absence of belonging. It's knowing that what you feel is real, but having no one around to validate it in the way you need. It's carrying a spirituality that has no form, no name, no community to recognize it. And this weighs heavily in a way that Scorpio rarely admits, because admitting it would mean accepting that the departure had a cost. And they left thinking they were freeing themselves, and they were. But freedom and lightness are not the same thing. Scorpio's faith is like water that doesn't fit in a small cup, not because there's too much water, but because the cup was made to contain it, and Scorpio's water doesn't want to be contained. It wants to flow deeper, to where there's more truth, to where difficult questions aren't treated as threats. And when religion functions more like a cup than a river, Scorpio overflows. And the overflow seems like a problem, when in reality, it's nature. There's something Scorpio does after leaving religion that no one expects. They begin searching for the sacred elsewhere, but not frivolously. Not like tourists, flitting from belief to belief without committing to any. Scorpio doesn't work that way. When they search, they immerse themselves. They read, they study, they spend entire nights trying to understand what they're feeling and what's true for them now that the old structure no longer exists. And it's in this search that they begin to discover something disturbing and liberating at the same time. That the God they always sought wasn't confined to the walls of any temple. That the presence they felt in the best spiritual experiences of their lives didn't belong to the institution. It belonged to direct, intimate, unfiltered contact with the mystery. This is not relativism. It's not the famous phrase, God is everywhere, used as an excuse for not committing to anything. For Scorpio, this is the opposite of relativism. It's a radical deepening of one's own faith. It's the decision not to accept a diluted version of the sacred just because it comes with social approval. It's the often painful choice to be honest about what one truly believes, even when that honesty isolates one. And this isolation has phases. In the beginning, there is relief, the feeling that the weight has been lifted, that he no longer needs to pretend to believe in what he doesn't believe, to perform a piece he doesn't feel, to smile at the right people at the right times. There is an initial lightness that seems to confirm that the decision was right. But after a few months, sometimes after a year or two, the relief begins to share space with something else. With the realization that he left carrying a wound that hasn't yet healed, with the memory of the good things that existed in the community, in belonging, in the ritual, with the longing to have a place where the sacred had form, name, time, smell. Because even if the form no longer served its purpose, the function it fulfilled was real. And this is where Scorpio faces one of the greatest paradoxes of its spiritual existence. It set out in search of authenticity, but authenticity came accompanied by a loneliness that religion, with all its limitations, protected against. There was no easy answer to this. There is no shortcut. Scorpio's path in the sacred was never the shortest path. It was always the truest. And true, in this case, means slow, non-linear, and sometimes very lonely. The stone that Scorpio swallows, the guilt they silently carry for years within a religious environment. It has a name, and understanding the mechanism changes everything about how you process belonging, doubt, and the weight of the sacred. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, deals precisely with this ability of Scorpio to absorb the sacred with an intensity that others don't understand, and how to transform that into real self-knowledge, not accumulated guilt. For those who always knew there was something deeper beneath what religion could name, this book is where that something finally finds language. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. The spiritual loneliness that Scorpio carries after leaving a religious structure is real, and it doesn't disappear on its own with time. It needs a path. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, was created for this exact moment, when you left, but the emptiness is still there. When the freedom you sought arrived, but came accompanied by an unexpected loneliness. It doesn't propose a return to the institution. It proposes an encounter with a spirituality that can finally support you whole, with your doubts, your contradictions, and your intensity. For Scorpio, this is not optional. It's what separates a spiritual crisis from a true spiritual transformation. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. This Scorpio's movement of rebuilding the sacred from scratch through their own door, without any approved manual, is one of the bravest acts this sign can undertake. And it demands more than determination. It requires an inner map that most have never received. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, is that map. It shows how to recognize the divine in places where no one taught you to look for it, how to transform rupture into a solid foundation, and how to make Scorpio's intensity not a burden to carry, but a compass to follow. For those who are at this point, have already left, have already felt the cost, and now want to build something real, this is the next step. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And then, at some point along this lonely path, something changes. Not all at once, not with fanfare, silently, like almost everything that matters in a Scorpio's life. He begins to find the sacred in places that religion would never have approved of. in art that hurts him in a good way, in honest conversation that goes too deep to be comfortable, in grief where he feels a presence he can't name but recognizes with his whole body before recognizing it with his mind, in the unsettling beauty of being completely alive, with all that means, including the ugly parts. He begins to build a spirituality in reverse, from the bottom up, from darkness to light. And it is more solid than anything he has had before, because he didn't inherit it. He built it. It wasn't a clean build. It wasn't a construction with an approved plan, certified materials, and a defined deadline. It was a construction that happened in the middle of life, with the materials left over after the demolition, with the questions no one answered, with the wounds that didn't heal within the expected time frame, with the pieces of faith that resisted the rupture without him understanding why. And from these ruins, Scorpio does what Scorpio has always done, transforms. Not because it's easy, because it's the only movement he knows that produces something real. There comes a moment, and anyone who has experienced this knows exactly what I'm talking about, when Scorpio pauses in the middle of life and realizes that the spirituality they now possess, built in the shadows, through doubts and through difficult nights, has a texture that inherited spirituality never had. It's no longer beautiful. It's no longer organized. It doesn't have the comforting rituals of before. It doesn't have the community that sings together. It doesn't have the collective comfort of worship. But it is theirs, completely theirs. And that makes all the difference for Scorpio, who always knew deep down that the only faith that matters is the one that has been tested. There's something Scorpio discovers in this process, and it silently changes how he relates to everything, not just religion. He discovers that depth is not the same as certainty, that going deep into a question is not a sign of weakness of faith, it's a sign of respect for the truth, and that the God he was looking for was not the God of easy answers. It was the God of questions that don't have simple answers, the God who dwells in mystery, not the God who solves it. And in this recognition, something settles. It's not peace in the conventional sense. Scorpio rarely experiences peace in the conventional sense. It's more like a stilling, the feeling that he has stopped fighting against his own nature, that the intensity that for so long was treated as a problem, too much faith, too much questioning, too much depth, was in fact the specification of a spirituality that was made to go to places that conventional forms cannot reach. And that the time he spent believing there was something wrong with him was, in reality, the time he spent trying to fit into a form that was never made for him. Not because he was superior to it, because he was different from it. And different is neither better nor worse, it's different. And Scorpio, who spent so much of his life trying to be what he wasn't in order to belong to what didn't fit him, finally begins to understand that the belonging he always sought wasn't outside. It was inside. And the only community that never abandoned him was the one he carried in his own heart, the uninterrupted conversation between him and what he believes in. What Scorpio finally understands, and this understanding changes everything, is that he never lost faith. He lost form, and form was never the essential thing. The essential thing was always what form tried to contain, the real experience of the sacred direct contact with something greater than logic can explain, the feeling that there is a purpose beneath all the pain he carried. There's a realization that Scorpio discovers alone, deep in their most difficult nights, that God isn't afraid of questions, that the sacred isn't offended by doubt, that the truest faith isn't the one that never wavered. It's the one that wavered, broke, was rebuilt from scratch and yet remained. Because in Scorpio, permanence was never about not changing. It was about changing everything and still continuing to be. The empty chair left behind is not a sign of loss. It's the space Scorpio needed to finally breathe, to find in the silence that seemed empty the presence they had always been searching for. And it was there all along, waiting, in the way only the sacred knows how to wait, without judgment, without deadlines, without demanding that you be different from who you are. Scorpio didn't turn away from God. He sought him through paths others fear to tread, and it was there, deep down, where the light takes longer to arrive, that he found something that finally lasted. Not because it was perfect, because it was true. And for Scorpio, truth was always the only criterion that truly mattered when everything else crumbled. The only one he couldn't negotiate, no matter how hard he tried. The only one that, in the end, saved him from a faith that would have lasted forever, but would never have truly been his.